for joining us today for this online presentation related to improving safety at low-head dams in Colorado. We wish that we could be presenting to you all in person today, but we're thankful that CASFM has found a way to conduct the conference online, since this is a really important topic for CASFM members who work or recreate on state waters. I'm going to start with a little overview of the presentation, which I'm giving right now. Then I'm going to turn it over to Carl Kingery of Wright Water to talk for a few minutes about the hydraulic hazards of low-head dams. Following that, Bill McCormick from the State Dam Safety Office is going to talk about Colorado's low-head dam safety initiative. And then finally, I'll come back on and present a few conclusions and next steps. This is a video of a low-head dam from Kentucky, and I'm showing this to identify a few of the key features that make low-head dams so dangerous. First of all, note the smooth water upstream of the dam, and imagine yourself in a kayak a few hundred yards upstream, sitting low in the water. If there weren't any warning signs, would you even be aware that this structure existed and the hazards associated with it? Also, this is not a high dam. Low-head dams are generally about 15 feet in height or less, and they don't store a lot of water upstream from the dam. As a result, these types of dams are often not regulated under typical dam safety regulations, which are focused on taller and higher hazard dams. Nonetheless, the head created by these types of dams represents a lot of energy that's being converted from potential energy upstream of the dam into kinetic energy in the form of velocity as the water flows over the dam. At the base of the dam, there's considerable turbulence and a hydraulic jump. Carl will tell you more about that in a few minutes. What we're seeing here is what's called a submerged hydraulic jump. Also, note the tennis ball in the video. It's a little difficult to see, but once the tennis ball goes over the dam, it's trapped in the reverse roller downstream, and there's no escape. Carl's going to provide some more detail about this in just a few minutes. Awareness of low-head dams is increasing across the country thanks to the work of state agencies like the Colorado Department of Natural Resources, professional agencies like the American Society of Dam Safety Officials, researchers, and other organizations. The slide that I'm showing you right now is a clip from a database compiled by Dr. Rollin Hotchkiss and Ed Kern of Brigham Young University of low-head dam fatalities in the United States. They have documented more than 200 locations representing hundreds of fatalities, and this is certainly not an all-inclusive list. If you're aware of any other dams with fatalities, I know that Rollin would be very interested in this. Now, you might say that the total number of drownings associated with low-head dams is pretty low compared to other sources of mortality like car accidents, and that's true. However, a very important fact is that drownings at low-head dams are preventable. And if we can do anything to prevent these deaths, especially if it's something as easy as putting up signs, that's something that should definitely be done. Now I'm going to turn it over to Carl to discuss the hydraulic hazards of low-head dams.
Thank you, Andrew. Andrew gave a really good description of what a low-head dam is earlier. Here you can see in this photo that there's a low-head dam, and this one is one that's in Colorado. You can see that it has similar characteristics to the one that Andrew described earlier. Slow upstream water. The water approaches the dam, it accelerates, plunges down towards the tailwater, and also has a boil at the footing of the base of the dam. That boil is where water splits and either goes upstream or goes downstream at the surface of the water. The water that goes upstream is forced back up against the toe of the dam, and it creates an entrapment zone, an area where the plunging water over the dam comes in contact with the water flowing upstream towards the dam, and objects and people can get trapped in there. You can see that in the photo on the right, there's a person that's in that, what we would call the hydraulic or reverse roller or drowning machine. Next. This is a dam that's in Missouri. It's the Lime Kiln Dam. One of the things that creates that dangerous upstream directed water from the boil, that reverse roller or hydraulic, is an increased tailwater depth on the downstream side of the dam. You can see here that there's some sandbars and some trees that are present downstream from the dam. Those types of features tend to increase the water surface elevation of that tailwater. That increased tailwater elevation causes the hydraulic jump that forms to be submerged, and for that hydraulic jump to have a reverse roller, so it can have that entrapment potential. This is actually a Lowhead Dam where there were some fishermen on the downstream side who unfortunately were sucked into the Lowhead Dam from the downstream side. Next. Here's a video that shows the force of a Lowhead Dam and its power. You'll see here in a second that there is a kayaker coming down the creek here towards the Lowhead Dam. Fortunately, he's not aware of all the hydraulic characteristics, and so he's going over the slower moving water. As he crests over the dam, his kayak accelerates and he plunges into the tailwater. He's now at the boil, and the upstream flowing water is forcing him back up towards the Lowhead Dam, towards where that plunging jet is going to be coming in contact with the tailwater. Even though he's paddling hard, he's not able to escape that upstream flowing water. As the kayak flipped, you can see it's forced down under the water by that plunging jet, and it pops back up again. That's the dangerous hydraulic roller that we're talking about. Next. In a traditional hydraulic jump, that water continues downstream. The fast, shallow moving water, after it crests over the dam, runs along the bottom of the stream bed, and as it runs along the stream bed and loses energy, it goes through a change in depth where it transitions from fast, shallow moving water to slow, deep moving water. And that transition is called the hydraulic jump. Typically, there's some energy loss that's associated with that, and in the absence of high tailwater conditions, that water continues downstream. Next. In a submerged hydraulic jump, where there's increased tailwater, that water is no longer able to travel downstream in the same way that it was earlier. Here you can see that the water is forced up towards the surface by that increased tailwater. It creates a boil and then splits in the direction in which it flows. Half of that water goes upstream back towards the dam, half of it goes downstream towards the tailwater area. In the upstream flowing water, that's that hydraulic reverse roller drowning machine area. It's recirculated, and lots of air is entrained in the water, and there's an aeration zone which is lower in density. That's part of the reason that kayaker was having trouble escaping from it, because his paddles weren't able to get the same grip on the water, the purchase on the water, that they could under normal conditions. Next. I'll run through these quickly. These are several different types of hydraulic jumps. Case 1 is the first traditional hydraulic jump. All that water is traveling downstream. And Lowhead dams can have all of these different types of hydraulic jumps under different conditions. High tailwater conditions can change the type of hydraulic jump that forms at a Lowhead Dam, and that's part of the reason Lowhead dams are so dangerous, is because that reverse roller drowning machine condition is not always there. So like I said, case 1, that's that traditional hydraulic jump. Case 2, there's some increased tailwater. That hydraulic jump is beginning to get forced up against the Lowhead Dam. There's becoming to be some modest entrapment potential, but largely they will be able to continue downstream and escape from that Lowhead Dam. Next. Case 3 is our submerged hydraulic jump that we've been discussing with the hydraulic or reverse roller. There's high entrapment potential, and it's very difficult to escape. Case 4, if that tailwater increases further and is able to drown out the Lowhead Dam, so to speak, then that hydraulic is not able to form because there's not enough energy loss. Next. Here you can see that as the water in a low-head dam flows over the crest of the dam, it travels downward towards the stream bed. You can see that as the water has traveled in this photo, this is a to-scale photo of a low-head dam. As it travels downstream along the stream bed, it's created a scour hole, depositing sediment on the downstream side of where that plunging jet is and where the boil is. That scour hole can exacerbate the formation of a hydraulic, and it's from the surface, from above the low-head dam, very difficult to see. It's below where that aerated zone is with all the bubbles in white. Next. There is one way to potentially escape from low-head dams if you are unfortunately caught into one, and that is to try and get underneath the boil. One of the ways that debris continues and people can get stuck at the low-head dam is that they get stuck in between that upstream flowing current on the surface and the plunging jet coming over the dam. If a person is able to dive down towards the bottom, they can sometimes travel with the flow, and instead of coming back into the washing machine, can travel along the bottom of the river underwater and get forced out with the downstream portion of the flow that's splitting at the boil. I have heard of this being successful under one incident, because the man who was able to do it was did not choose to do it, but was forced to be able to make the decision to attempt this. However, this would be considered a last resort and should not be counted on. With that, I'll turn it over to Bill McCormick with Colorado DNR.
Our discussions about low-head dam safety began in January of 2019 with some outreach from the public to DNR to really look at the issue and try to do something about it. Our initial discussions within DNR show that there was an absence of defined responsibility or authority, essentially no regulation of low-head dams in Colorado. So that was one thing that we had to consider and work against in order to be able to decide on how we might make positive change on the situation. And the two things that we really focused on were, number one, defining the extent of the issue around the state by creating an inventory. The second was to try to assemble a steering committee, an advisory group, to be able to discuss the issue with the varied stakeholders and really see what the best path forward might be. Next. So we were able to gather some funding to hire an intern through the summer of 2019 to develop the inventory that we'll talk about. And we also asked different folks within several of the divisions of the Department of Natural Resources and outside the agency to be part of this steering committee to talk about the issue. And that was formed, and we had our first steering committee meeting in July of 2019. Through the course of 2019, we also worked on some strategic partnerships within the agricultural community and with the recreation community to really try to get as much stakeholder input as we could on the issue. Next. So the steering committee, it was formed by a number of agencies of the divisions within the Department of Natural Resources, at the Executive Director's Office, at Colorado Parks and Wildlife, Division of Water Resources, Colorado Water Conservation Board. Those were the DNR entities. We reached out to the Colorado Office of Outdoor Recreation for their nexus with recreation community, and also the Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Management, the State Hazard Mitigation Officer, who typically administers the FEMA hazard mitigation funding that we thought might be helpful if we were going to do some mitigation projects. Mile High Flood District here in the metro area has a lot of experience with working with flooding and river issues. And then outside entities, Wright Water Engineers, Andrew Earles, they've been involved in low-head dam issues for a number of years and have some great insight. And then the general public, Ruth Wright as well. Next. So the strategic partnerships that we've been able to establish, one is with DARCA, the Ditch and Reservoir Company Alliance, and they give us access to the agricultural community, which is a major stakeholder. That they own the majority of the diversion structures within Colorado. So if we're going to have discussions about mitigation at those structures and activities, they really need to be at the table. And we've had great discussions with them so far. That they're committed to doing what they can to reduce the hazards at structures that their members own. And then American Whitewater, they maintain the National Whitewater Inventory, which is maps that whitewater enthusiasts can tap into before they hit the rivers. And they're excited to be able to include our inventory information onto their website just to raise awareness. So before people get on the rivers, they know what's downstream. Next. Our Lowhead Dam inventory, as I said, our intern worked through the summer of 2019. She worked on the main stem rivers and then the major tributaries to the main stem. We used an aerial photo interpretation approach to this using satellite imagery within Google Earth. Really just started at the downstream end of the river and worked our way upstream, identifying lowhead dams that are pretty obvious on aerial photos. Through that process, she was able to establish that we had about 750 diversion structures, about 250 grade control structures, and about 100 recreation structures. We divided the lowhead dams into these categories to have some way to assign relative risk. Diversion structures are the classic lowhead dams that Carl talked about and have the highest hazard associated with those. Grade control structures tend to be engineered to be a more benign. They've got longer slopes and often have a boat chute down the center of them or through them. They are maintained to reduce stream degradation. So they use a lot of grouted riprap. So that could be a bumpy, abrasive ride if you're outside of the boat chute area, but generally less hazardous than diversion structures. And then the recreation structures, we wanted to include those because they certainly can be seen on aerial images, and they represent the river parks and the play holes that many communities have built to provide amenities for tourism and recreation. And then they also include some of the more visible fish habitat structures such as J hooks and things like that. So next slide, please. There's also a nice inventory study report that's available that the intern produced as she was finishing up the project. So that speaks to all the topics of how it was done, the steering committee, some of the mitigation hazards, a little bit about what other states are doing in this area that provide models for us to use, et cetera. So next slide. Our Lowhead Dam inventory website is going to become live any day now, literally, within the Department of Natural Resources. And it provides location information and a download capability. You know, we're hoping to provide this information so that others can help us raise awareness. It's a color-coded scheme that has sort of a red, yellow, green aspect to it. As I said, the red would be the most hazardous. Diversion structures, grade control structures are somewhat less hazardous. And recreation structures by their nature are meant to be fun and less hazardous. You have to note though that, you know, any recreation on rivers comes with its own set of hazards. So we encourage everybody to be prepared before getting on the river at all. Next slide. We've also done some work recently in getting some signs installed on structures where there have been known fatalities in the past. This happens to be the Lower Platte and Beaver diversion structure between Fort Morgan and Brush, Colorado. Had two tragic accidents, one in 2016 and another in 2019. So we had some CWCB funding to get signs fabricated and installed, and we chose this site as our first case into this. Wright Water engineers, Carl and Andrew, provided great input into the signs and what the colors and the sizes and the message. We also got some advice on the messaging from American Whitewater, what they thought would be most responded to by the folks on the river. Next slide, please. So happy to say the signs on the river left, which is Colorado Parks and Wildlife, State Wildlife Area, those signs have been installed. So we've got a nice 4x8 sign, bright red, really hard to miss when you're on the river. Next slide. On the right side of this photo is a separate photo of looking upstream from this structure. So we can really see that folks coming down the river will be able to see this sign. Next slide, please. As Carl said, there is a danger of getting pulled in against the lowhead dams from currents downstream. So we installed some warning signs in the area downstream. This one happens to be if a tuber or a boater was portaging, this would signal to them to put back in the river far enough downstream to avoid that current. Next slide. We also put that same sign on the other side of this one so that any fishermen are approaching from downstream would also get that same information and hopefully keep themselves out of harm's way by staying a safe distance away from the dam. Next slide. We also, the last thing we'll talk about is our water plan grant, which we were able to secure this summer. We've got 5 areas that we're trying to work on mitigation of risk. In the warn and educate area, we want to continue the website development of the inventory, put more educational materials on the website, some public service announcements and case studies to really educate folks on the hazards of low head dams. We're going to continue the signage, and hopefully through the stakeholder engagement work that we're going to do with the water plan grant, we'll be able to identify other locations where signage would be beneficial, and also do some work on explaining the limited liability that landowners have by allowing people to mitigate around their dams. We hope to work with DHSEM and CWCB on funding mitigation or elimination projects where we can modify existing dams for multiple purposes or even remove dams that might not be necessary. And then another key component is to be able to educate the emergency responders, because there are hazards to emergency response to incidents at low head dams. We don't want to put the first responders in danger either. So Wright water engineers, Ken Wright and Carl Kingery have put together a really nice program that we hope to get more activity in that around the state. And we've got 3 sources of funding for that. CBCB, the water plan grant, Wright Water's in-kind execution of their first responder training, and then some other funding from the National Dam Safety Program from FEMA. Next slide, please. And our next steps will be to execute the water plan grant. As I said, there's those mitigation activities of the website. We hope to do some stakeholder outreach, get some more signage installed, and then some first responder training. We need to establish where the low head dam safety program is going to live within DNR. So that's something that we're working on. Continue our strategic partnerships and work with DHSEM on funding with some of the large FEMA hazard mitigation buckets of money, and work with CWCB to, as a possible match to those FEMA sources of funding to make advances and reduce the risk here in Colorado. Next slide.
Thanks so much, Bill and Carl, for the great presentation. To wrap this up, I just wanted to run through a few conclusions drawn from Carl and Bill's presentations. And the first one is that low head dam drownings can be prevented through education, outreach, signage, physical dam modifications, and other practices that Bill was just talking about in his part of the presentation. The other important takeaway is that the hazards of low head dams are often hidden, and typical recreational river users may not even be aware of these hazards. The third conclusion is that the state of Colorado has been developing a program to improve safety that Bill just told you about, and Bill just went through the next steps there. If any of you all have information to contribute, we'd definitely be interested in it. And the final conclusion is more just of a plea for data, which is that if you know of low-head dams that are hazardous, or you have photographs or other information, please get in touch with me, Bill, or Carl, so that we can include your information in the database. And we really appreciate your interest in this topic. And with that, we're finished with the presentation. I would like to acknowledge others who have been involved, including Colorado Parks and Wildlife, the Colorado Water Conservation Board, Ruth Wright, who's actually a former state legislator, the Colorado Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Management, and the Mile High Flood District, against others. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present today, and we'd be glad to answer a few questions.